The day the sky broke, I was 80 feet up on a steel beam, eating a stale ham and cheese sandwich. The sky wasn't blue anymore. It was the color of a day-old bruise, a swirling, sick purple green that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Every bird in the city went silent. At the exact same moment, the rivet guns stopped. The traffic below choked and died. A silence fell over Boston that was so complete, so profound, it felt like the world was holding its breath. Then the voice came. It wasn't in our ears, it was inside our heads. It was a calm, melodic voice, a voice that sounded like 1,000 glass chimes ringing in perfect harmony. It was the most beautiful and most terrifying thing I had ever heard. It said, "People of Earth, be still. We are the Luminals. Your existence is now under our stewardship." There was a pause, a moment where 7 billion hearts hammered in unison. I dropped my sandwich. It fell 80 feet and I didn't see it land. "Your development has been noted. Your capacity for both creation and destruction is a cosmic imbalance. We will correct this. We will bring you into the galactic fold. Your compliance is required." Another pause. I could feel the thoughts of the other guys on the crew, a chaotic storm of fear and disbelief. Jimmy, a guy who prayed every morning, was thinking about the rapture. Old Man Hemlock was thinking it was the Russians. I was only thinking of one thing, my daughter, Lily. To ensure a peaceful transition and to cultivate the next generation under our guidance, we require a tithe, 1/10 of your young. All children between the ages of 5 and 10 are to be surrendered to our designated collection centers. This is not a negotiation. This is not a negotiation. This is the price of your continued existence. You have 1 week. The voice faded, not like a sound, but like a memory you can't quite hold on to. The sky remained a bruised, churning mess. Then the screaming started, not from one person, from everyone. A city of millions, screaming as one. I didn't scream. I just scrambled down the skeleton of that building, faster than I ever had, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. They wanted our children. They wanted our children. They wanted my Lily. And in that moment, shinnying down a cold steel beam with the world ending above me, I knew they could have the planet, they could have the sky, but they were not getting my little girl. They wanted a tithe. What they were going to get was a war. The drive home was a nightmare symphony. Car horns blared in a continuous panic drone. People were abandoning their vehicles in the middle of Storrow Drive, their faces pale masks of terror, staring up at the sick sky. A woman was on her knees in the breakdown lane, hands clasped, praying to a god who had clearly left the building. The Luminals. The word itself felt alien, smooth, and sharp at the same time. A tithe. The word was ancient, biblical. Something you give to a church, not to monsters from the sky. 1/10. It sounded so sterile, so mathematical. So damned reasonable if you weren't the one whose child was the one. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel of my pickup. Every traffic law was a forgotten relic of a world that had ended an hour ago. I drove on sidewalks, over medians, my truck groaning in protest. All I could see was Lily's face. Her last school picture was taped to my dashboard. The gappy smile. The freckles splattered across her nose like she'd run through a sprinkler of brown paint. 7 years old. Right in their goddamn strike zone. When I finally slammed the truck into park in my driveway, the front door of our little suburban house flew open. Sarah stood there, her face a mess of tears and disbelief. We didn't say anything. We just ran to each other and held on, 2 driftwood spars in a hurricane. "Mark," she sobbed into my shoulder, her voice muffled by my work shirt. "Did you hear it? In your head?" I nodded, my throat too tight for words. "Lily?" I finally managed to croak. "She's in her room," Sarah said, pulling back. Her eyes were wide, frantic. She didn't hear it. She was watching cartoons. She just thinks the television broke. A small mercy, a tiny, fragile shield against the horror. We went inside. The house felt different. The familiar scent of lemon cleaner and old wood was still there, but underneath it was something else. The smell of fear. It clung to the curtains, seeped into the floorboards. Our home, our sanctuary, now felt like a trap. Lily was sitting on the floor of her room, surrounded by her stuffed animals. She was trying to draw the cartoon characters she'd been watching, her tongue sticking out in concentration. She looked up when we came in, her bright blue eyes innocent of the cosmic horror that had just been announced. "Daddy, the television's all fuzzy and the sky looks yucky." She said it with the simple finality of a child, stating a fact. I knelt down and pulled her into a hug that was probably too tight. I buried my face in her hair. It smelled like baby shampoo and sunshine, the smell of everything good and pure in the world. "It's okay, sweetie," I murmured, my voice thick. "Daddy's here." Over her small shoulder, I met Sarah's eyes. The question was there, stark and terrifying. What do we do? The government hadn't said a word. The news channels were just showing the same footage of the sky over and over, with frantic, babbling anchors who had no answers. For a few hours, the world was left to its own devices, simmering in a stew of raw panic. We tried to pretend. Sarah made dinner, mac and cheese from a box. Lily chattered about her day at school, about a boy named Kevin who pulled her pigtails. We answered in monosyllables, our smiles feeling like brittle masks. Every shadow in the corner of the room looked menacing. Every creak of the house was the sound of them coming. After we put Lily to bed, reading her a story about a brave knight and a silly dragon, Sarah and I sat at the kitchen table. The silence was louder than the screaming from earlier. "They can't be serious," Sarah whispered, staring at her hands. "It has to be a trick, some kind of global prank." "It wasn't a prank, Sarah," I said, my voice flat. "I felt it." We all did. But to just give them the kids, the government won't allow it, the army. They've lied. I wanted to believe her. I desperately wanted to believe that somewhere generals were moving pins on a map, fighter jets were scrambling, and a plan was being formed. But the voice in my head hadn't sounded like something you could fight with a tank. It sounded like inevitability. It sounded like God, if God was a cold-hearted accountant.
1/10,
Sarah said, the words catching in her throat. "It's like a lottery, a death lottery. Who would decide? Who would walk their child to one of those centers?" I looked out the kitchen window at the purple-green stain that had replaced the night sky. The stars were gone. I thought of our neighbors, the Hendersons with their 8-year-old son, the Garcias with their twin 6-year-old girls. We were all in the same boat, a leaky, sinking vessel. "We're not," I said, my voice low and hard. "We are not doing that." Sarah looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "What can we do, Mark? Where can we go?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, reaching across the table to take her hand. Her skin was cold as ice. "But they are not taking her. I will burn this whole world down before they take her." It was a promise made in a small kitchen under a poisoned sky. A promise from a simple man who fixed things for a living. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my soul, that I was going to have to break a lot of things to keep it. The first 24 hours were a global fever dream. Governments finally broke their silence, issuing panicked, contradictory statements. We are assessing the situation. Remain calm. Do not leave your homes. It was the kind of useless noise you make when you have no power, like shouting at a tidal wave. The internet was a cesspool of theories. It was a mass psychic event caused by a solar flare. It was a coordinated terrorist attack using some new brainwave technology. My favorite was that it was all a viral marketing campaign for a new movie. People clung to these theories like life rafts, because the alternative was too monstrous to comprehend. Sarah spent most of the day compulsively cleaning, scrubbing floors and washing windows that were already spotless. A frantic attempt to impose order on a world that had none. I spent the day fortifying. I nailed boards over the basement windows. I changed the locks on the doors. I checked the emergency supplies we kept for blizzards. Canned food, water, batteries, a first aid kit. It all felt so pitifully inadequate. We were preparing for a snowstorm when the apocalypse had already arrived. Lily was the most difficult part. How do you explain the end of the world to a 7-year-old? We couldn't, so we lied. We told her there was a bad sickness outside, and we had to stay in for a while. It was like a game. The stay inside game. She bought it for a while. But kids are smart. They have antennae for fear. She saw the way Sarah's hands trembled when she poured a glass of juice. She saw the way I kept staring out the windows, my jaw tight. Is the sickness going to get us, Daddy? She asked me that afternoon, her small voice cutting through my haze of dread. We were sitting on the living room floor, building a lopsided tower out of blocks. No, sweetie, I said, forcing a smile. I won't let it. Promise? I promise. Her innocent trust was a physical weight on my chest. Every promise I made to her felt like another lie, another brick in a wall of deceit that was bound to crumble. The second night was worse than the first. The novelty of the bruised sky had worn off, replaced by a suffocating sense of permanence. It hung over us, a constant reminder of the demand. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the chimes of that voice, saw the soulless calculation in the words, a tithe. Sarah and I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, not touching. The space between us felt like a chasm. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad, she whispered into the darkness. I turned my head on the pillow to look at her. Her silhouette was barely visible. What did you say? The voice, she said, her own voice trembling. It said for their guidance, to cultivate them. Maybe it's not. Maybe they won't be hurt. Maybe it's like a special school. I sat up, my blood running cold. Sarah, are you listening to yourself? They're aliens who disabled the entire planet in a second. They're demanding we hand over our children like we're harvesting corn. There is no special school in that scenario. But what's the alternative, Mark? She shot back, sitting up too. Tears were glistening on her cheeks. They said it's the price for our existence. What if they're telling the truth? What if they just dare? Erase us, all of us. Lily included. Isn't it better that some survive? Isn't that logic? This was the real poison of the luminal's demand. It wasn't just the fear. It was the way it made you think the unthinkable. The way it pitted survival against love, logic against instinct. It turned spouses against each other in the dark of their own bedrooms. It's not logic, it's surrender, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. To hear is a difference. You have a plan then? You, a construction worker, have a plan to fight beings who can talk to our brains from orbit. Please, enlighten me. My plan, I said, getting out of bed and pacing the floor, is to protect our daughter. That's it. That's the only plan that matters. I don't care about the rest of the world right now. I don't care about logic. I care about her. And if our defiance gets her killed, gets us all killed, she cried. I stopped pacing and looked at her. At this woman I had loved for 15 years, now twisted by a fear so profound it was making her unrecognizable. Then we die together, I said, as a family. But we don't feed our little girl to the wolves to save our own skins. We just don't. The argument ended there. There was nothing else to say. I slept on the couch, not out of anger, but because I couldn't stand to lie next to the part of her that was considering it. That was the part the luminals were counting on. The part in every human that would sacrifice anything to see one more sunrise. As I drifted into a restless sleep, I knew this was the first battle. It wasn't fought with guns or bombs. It was fought in the quiet spaces, in the kitchens and bedrooms of the world. It was the battle for our own humanity, and we were already losing. The next morning, the third day, the world got its proof. It wasn't an explosion. It was a silence. A town in Arizona, Miracle Mesa, a sleepy community of about 3,000 people, had publicly refused. The mayor, a fiery ex-Marine, went on whatever local channel was still broadcasting and told the luminals to go to hell. He said they'd meet them with rifles and resolve. We all saw it on the news. It was a brief shining moment of defiance. People cheered. It felt like the beginning of the fight back. Then at dawn, Miracle Mesa went dark. Satellite feeds showed nothing but static. Phone lines went dead. A news helicopter that tried to fly over it crashed, its electronics completely fried. By noon, the first shaky drone footage made it out. Miracle Mesa was still there. The houses were there. The cars were in the driveways. The coffee cups were on the breakfast tables. But the people were gone. All of them, not a body, not a drop of blood. Just 3,000 souls vanished from the face of the earth. The Luminors didn't send a message. They didn't have to. The empty town was the message: comply or be erased. The debate was over. The denial was shattered. The fear was now absolute. The disappearance of Miracle Mesa broke something in the world spirit. The defiant speeches stopped. The brave talk of resistance evaporated like mist in a desert sun. The empty town was a perfectly crafted piece of psychological warfare. The Luminals hadn't used overwhelming force. They had used surgical, incomprehensible power. They hadn't turned the town to glass. They had unplugged it from reality. It was a ghost story made real, and it terrified people more than any bomb could have. That afternoon, the President of the United States, a man I had voted for, appeared on television. He was broadcasting from a bunker somewhere, the seal of his office on a bare concrete wall behind him. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 3 days. His voice was hollow, stripped of all its usual bluster. "My fellow Americans," he began, his eyes looking haunted, "we have been in constant communication with leaders around the globe. We have consulted with our brightest minds in science, in military strategy, in philosophy." He took a long, shaky breath. "We are faced with an opponent whose technological and biological capabilities are beyond our comprehension. To resist is to guarantee the extinction of our species. It is a terrible, agonizing truth, but it is the truth." I was standing in the living room, watching the small screen. Sarah was on the couch, holding a pillow to her chest like a shield. Lily was asleep upstairs, mercifully unaware. "Therefore," the president continued, and I could see the moisture in his eyes, "with the heaviest heart in human history, we must comply." We have been given a path to survival. A horrific path, but a path nonetheless. The United States government will cooperate with the luminal stewardship. We will facilitate the tithe. He went on, talking about logistics, about how the selections would be handled with dignity and fairness, about how this was a sacrifice for the greater good. His words were just noise. The only word I heard was cooperate. They were folding. They were caving. They were going to help them. They were going to open the doors and hand over our children. I felt a rage. So pure and hot it was like swallowing fire. It wasn't just at the aliens anymore. It was at him. At all of them. The leaders, the generals, the ones who were supposed to protect us, were now the enemy's agents. He can't do that, Sarah whispered from the couch. The part of her that had considered compliance was gone now, burned away by the president's craven surrender. Seeing the betrayal spelled out so plainly had solidified her resolve as much as it had mine. He just did, I said, my voice a low growl. They're going to make a list. It was such a simple, bureaucratic thought, but it was the most terrifying thing I could imagine. A list. With names on it. And somewhere, in some government office, someone would be typing Lily's name. That night, after Lily was asleep, I went into the garage. It was my space, filled with the smell of sawdust, oil, and metal. I started gathering things. A crowbar, a heavy-duty flashlight, my old hunting knife, a length of chain. I wrapped them in an old blanket and put them in the trunk of the truck. What are you doing? Sarah was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed. They'll be coming, I said, not looking at her. Not the aliens. Us, our own people. Cops, soldiers, someone with a clipboard and a gun. They'll call them compliance officers or some other gentle name, and they'll go door to door. So what are we doing? She asked, her voice steady now. All the fear had been replaced with a hard, cold anger that matched my own. We are leaving, I said. Tonight. We're not going to be here when they knock. Where, Mark? Where can we go that they can't find us? I finally looked at her. I don't know for sure, but the voice in my head, it felt clean. Precise. Like a radio signal. And what messes up a signal? What makes it hard to get a clear line? She thought for a moment. Mountains? Tunnels? Exactly, I said. Something dense, something that can get in the way. My grandfather used to have a hunting cabin way up in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. It's not on any modern maps. No electricity, no plumbing. It's primitive. We haven't been there in 20 years. You think it's still standing? I hope so, I said. It's our only chance. We pack light. Food, water, warm clothes, medicine. We take only what fits in the truck. We leave our phones, we leave everything. We move through the house like ghosts gathering supplies in the dim light. Every item we packed felt like a final goodbye to the life we knew. Sarah packed Lily's favorite stuffed bear, Mr. Snuggles. I packed the photo album with pictures of our wedding, of Lily's first steps. We were curating our lives, choosing which scraps to save from the fire. The hardest part was waking Lily. We carried her, sleepy and confused, out to the cold truck. Are we going on a trip, Mommy? She mumbled, rubbing her eyes. Yes, sweetie, Sarah said, her voice impossibly calm. A camping trip, a surprise. As I backed the truck out of the driveway, I looked at our house one last time. The porch light was on. The living room window glowed with a warm, inviting light. It looked so normal, so peaceful, a perfect little slice of a world that no longer existed. I thought of the president's speech. The sacrifice for the greater good. The cold, terrible logic of it. Maybe he was right. Maybe we were the selfish ones. Maybe our love for our daughter was a threat to the survival of the human race. I pushed the thought away. They could have their logic. They could have their greater good. I had my daughter asleep in the back seat, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. And as we drove into the darkness, away from the streetlights and towards the mountains, I made another promise. This one to myself. They could call me a traitor. They could call me a traitor. They could call me a fool. But no one would ever call me the father who stood by and did nothing. The highways were eerie. They weren't clogged with panicked drivers anymore. They were mostly empty, patrolled by military vehicles that rumbled past us with grim purpose. Searchlights on their roofs swept across the dark landscape. We were a ghost, a single pickup truck, running against the tide of forced obedience. I kept to the back roads as much as possible, my eyes scanning the rearview mirror, my heart pounding with every pair of approaching headlights. Sarah sat beside me, navigating with an old paper road atlas, the faint glow of a flashlight on the creased pages. Lily was asleep in the back, cocooned in blankets. Her peaceful breathing was the only thing that kept my own panic from boiling over. Every town we passed through felt like a wake. The houses were lit, but the streets were deserted. Curtains were drawn tight. It was a nation holding its breath, waiting for the knock on the door. The bruised purple sky was our constant companion, a ceiling of dread that blotted out the stars. It gave off a faint, sickly light, enough to see the silhouettes of the trees against the horizon. There was no day or night anymore, just a constant oppressive twilight. They're calling them liaison teams, Sarah said, her voice low. She'd managed to get a signal on a small battery-powered radio and was listening to a news broadcast that was heavy on calming tones and government-approved language. They'll be going door to door to assist families with the transition. Assist, I snorted. That's one word for it. They have the census data, Mark. They have the school records. They know exactly where every child lives. I know, I said, my grip tightening on the wheel. That was the part that galled me the most. The system we had built, the one designed to keep track of us, to educate us, to help us, was now being used as a tool for our subjugation. Every form we'd ever filled out was a map leading them straight to our daughter. We drove for hours, pushing north, deeper into the granite heart of New Hampshire. The roads got narrower, the trees thicker. The air grew colder, sharper. Around what should have been dawn, we finally turned off the last paved road and onto a dirt track that was little more than 2 ruts in the wilderness. The truck bucked and groaned, branches scraping against the doors like skeletal fingers. "Are you sure this is it?" Sarah asked, peering into the dense woods. "I think so," I said, relying on a 20-year-old memory. The big split oak tree should be just up ahead, and it was. A huge, ancient oak, its trunk split by lightning long ago, stood like a silent guardian at a fork in the track. I took the left path, the one that was more overgrown, more forgotten. 10 minutes later, the woods opened into a small, rocky clearing. And there it was, the cabin. It was smaller than I remembered, little more than a single room built of dark, weathered logs, with a stone chimney and a sagging porch. It looked like it was being slowly swallowed by the forest, but it was still standing. "We're here," I said, the words coming out as a sigh of relief. We carried a sleeping Lily inside first. The air was cold and musty, smelling of damp earth and mice. I lit a couple of our camping lanterns, their hiss filling the heavy silence. The cabin was stark, a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, 2 built-in bunks with thin, moldy mattresses. It was a hovel. It was a palace. It was safe. As Sarah made a bed for Lily on one of the bunks, tucking her in with our clean blankets, I got to work. I checked the fireplace flue, cleared out an old bird's nest, and soon had a small, crackling fire going. The warmth and light pushed back the gloom, making the small space feel like a fortress. We spent the first day in a state of exhausted, paranoid vigilance. I took the axe from the woodshed and split a mountain of firewood. Sarah found an old hand pump for water over a well out back. It took a lot of work, but we eventually got a trickle of rusty, then clear, cold water. We didn't talk much, we worked. The physical labor was a balm, a way to keep the terrible thoughts at bay. But the fear was always there, just beneath the surface. Every snap of a twig in the woods was the sound of approaching soldiers. Every gust of wind whistling through the logs was the whisper of the liminal's voice. On the 6th day since the arrival, just 1 day before the deadline for the tithe, I was scouting the perimeter of the clearing. I was trying to find a high point, somewhere I could get a view of the surrounding area. I climbed a rocky outcrop that overlooked the dirt track we'd come in on. From there, I could see for about a half a mile. As I was scanning the woods, I saw it, a glint of metal. I dropped to my belly, my heart instantly hammering. It was a truck, a dark green pickup, almost identical to mine, parked clumsily behind a thicket of pine trees, just off the track. It hadn't been there before. Someone else was here. Someone else had the same idea. My first instinct was pure terror. They'd found us. But it wasn't a military vehicle. It was just a civilian truck. For a long time, I just lay there on the cold rock, watching. Nothing happened. No one got out. Finally, my curiosity got the better of my fear. I crept back to the cabin. "Stay here, lock the door, and don't make a sound," I whispered to Sarah. "Here is someone else out there." I took the hunting knife and circled through the woods, moving as silently as I could, my feet sinking into the soft pine needles. I approached the truck from behind, my breath held tight in my chest. The truck was empty. The door was unlocked. On the passenger seat was a map, just like ours. A route from a town near us was marked in red pen. And in the truck bed under a tarp were boxes of canned goods, water jugs, and a child's bicycle. They weren't here to find us. They were here to hide. I heard a noise then, a quiet sob. It came from the direction of the split oak tree. I moved towards the sound, my knife held low, and then I saw them. A man and a little boy, no older than Lily, were huddled at the base of the great tree. The man was big, with a thick beard and the tired eyes of a fellow refugee. He was holding his son, trying to comfort him. The man looked up and saw me. His eyes went wide with fear. He pushed his son behind him, standing up, his hands held out in a gesture of surrender. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "We don't have anything. We just wanted a place to hide. We heard this area was off the grid." I looked at him, this other father, this reflection of my own desperation. I saw the same terror, the same fierce protective love in his eyes. He wasn't a threat. He was me. I slowly lowered the knife and tucked it back into my belt. "My name's Mark," I said, my voice hoarse. "My family is in a cabin just up the path. Are you few? Are you alone?" He nodded, relief washing over his face. "Yeah, just me and Noah. My wife, she's a nurse. They conscripted her to work at the collection center." The words hit me like a punch. Collection center. They were real. They were staffed. The mechanism of the horror was in place. "We should get your boy out of the cold," I said, gesturing back towards the cabin. Here is a fire. He looked at me, a flicker of hope in his exhausted eyes. Thank you, he said. I am Ben. We walked back to the cabin together, two fathers leading their sons away from the monsters. But as we walked, I realized the truth. The luminals weren't the only monsters anymore. There were new ones. The ones who would take a clipboard and a list and help them. The ones who would stand by and let it happen. And they looked just like us. Ben and Noah brought a new dynamic to our fragile sanctuary. Noah was a quiet, solemn boy of 6, who hadn't spoken a word since they'd fled their home. He just clung to his father's leg, his eyes wide and haunted. Lily, in her innocent way, tried to draw him out. She showed him her stuffed bear, Mr. Snuggles. She tried to get him to play with pine cones. He just watched her, silent and still. Ben was a plumber, a man as grounded and practical as I was. We fell into an easy, unspoken alliance. We were two pillars holding up the same collapsing roof. That night, the night before the tithe was due, the 5 of us huddled around the fireplace. The radio, which we only turned on for a few minutes at a time, to save batteries, brought us the news. The world was ready. The collection centers were open. They were mostly in schools, sports arenas, and community centers. Places that were supposed to be safe for children. The broadcast was full of sickeningly smooth language. They called the children ambassadors and pioneers. They called the surrender a ceremony of ascension. They were wrapping the horror in pretty paper, but it was still horror. My wife Carol, Ben said, staring into the flames. She called me just before we left, from a burner phone. She said they have doctors and nurses there to make sure the kids are healthy. They have cots and toys. They're trying to make it look normal. It's not normal, Sarah said, her voice like ice. It's a slaughterhouse pretending to be a summer camp. I know, Ben said, his head in his hands. She told me not to come back. She told me to take Noah and run, she said. She said the liaisons have lists, and they have soldiers with them. National Guard, not for the families that cooperate, for the ones that don't. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. They weren't just asking, they were prepared to take. The choice was a lie. It was comply or have your door kicked in. The world had been divided into 2 groups. The sheep walking to the slaughter, and the wolves who would drag them there. And then there was us, the rats, hiding in the walls. The next day, the day of the tithe, was the quietest day of my life. The forest itself seemed to be holding its breath. We didn't dare go outside. We sat in the dim cabin listening to the crackle of the fire, starting at every sound. Lily and Noah sat in a corner, Lily drawing pictures of sunny days and Noah just watching, his silence a heavy weight in the room. We were waiting. Waiting for the world to change again. Waiting to see if the luminals would keep their word. At midday, the radio announcer, his voice trembling with a forced, cheerful solemnity, declared that the ceremonies of ascension were beginning. We turned it off. We couldn't listen. We could only imagine the scenes. Parents leading their children by the hand, the forced smiles, the quiet tears, the betrayal sanitized and broadcast for the world to see. It was Sarah who noticed the change first. The light, she whispered, looking at the single grimy window. Look at the light. I looked. The constant bruised purple twilight was fading. A sliver of pale, watery blue was visible on the horizon. Over the next hour we watched, mesmerized as the sick colors of the luminal sky receded. The sickly green purple swirled and thinned, like ink in water, pulling back into the upper atmosphere until it was gone. And then, for the first time in a week, we saw the sun. It was a pale, wintry sun, but it was real. Its light streamed through the window, cutting a golden rectangle on the dusty floor. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Lily ran to the window. "The sky is fixed," she yelled, her voice full of a child's pure joy. "Can we go outside now? The sickness is gone." We didn't know what it meant. Had they left? Was it over? Ben and I shared a look. It was too easy, too clean. "Stay here," I said, grabbing my axe. Ben followed me, armed with a heavy tire iron from his truck. We stepped out onto the porch, blinking in the unfamiliar brightness. The air felt clean again. The forest looked normal. The birds were even starting to sing, tentatively at first, then in a full-throated chorus. It felt like the world had woken from a fever, but the feeling of dread didn't go away. It was a deep, cold knot in my stomach. We walked to the rocky outcrop, our boots crunching on the damp earth. We scanned the horizon. The world looked peaceful, reborn. Maybe that was it, Ben said, his voice full of a desperate hope. They took what they wanted and they left. Just as he said it, I saw them. Far in the distance, rising from the direction of the cities, were thin plumes of black smoke. Not 1 or 2 dozens, maybe hundreds. Small pillars of ruin, staining the new blue sky. "What is that?" Sarah asked. She and the children had followed us out. Lily pointed. "Look, smoke, like a campfire." It wasn't campfire smoke. "They're burning the evidence," I said, the words tasting like ash. "The schools, the arenas, they're burning the collection centers." Ben's face went white. "Carol," he whispered. "Number, they said?" "They said the staff would be safe." They lied. Of course they lied. They had gathered not only the children, but also the people who knew what happened. The ones who helped, the ones who could bear witness. The doctors, the nurses, the volunteers, the soldiers who stood guard. They were loose ends, and the luminals were tidy. The tithe wasn't just for the children, it was for anyone who participated. It was a purge, a cleanup. In that moment, the scale of their monstrousness became clear. They weren't just cosmic tyrants. They were meticulous, patient, and utterly without mercy. They hadn't just taken our children. They had made humanity complicit in the act, and then they had erased the accomplices. It was a perfect crime on a planetary scale. We were not safe. This wasn't the end. It was a pause, a reset. They had what they wanted for now, but they would be back, and the world they had left behind was a broken, traumatized place, ruled by leaders who had sold their own people for a temporary peace. The war hadn't been avoided. It had just been postponed, and we, the handful of people who had run, who had refused, were now more than just fugitives. We were the seeds of a different future. We were the resistance. We just didn't know it yet. The weeks that followed were a strange, hollow limbo. The world tried to return to normal, but it was a broken, limping kind of normal. The official story, peddled by the cowed governments of the world, was that the pioneers had successfully ascended to begin their training with the luminals. The fires at the collection centers were explained away as tragic accidents, the result of faulty wiring or gas leaks. No one believed it. Not really. But it was easier to pretend to believe it than to face the truth. The world was a house with a blood stain on the carpet that everyone had agreed to call a wine spill. Ben, Sarah, the kids, and I fell into a routine in our mountain fortress. We were a small, strange family, bound together by a shared trauma. Ben and I were the providers. We hunted with an old rifle I'd found in the cabin's crawl space, bringing back squirrels and the occasional deer. We fished in the cold mountain streams. We chopped wood. We kept watch. Sarah became the heart of our small community. She organized our meager supplies, cooked the meals, and most importantly, she became a teacher. Every day she would sit with Lily and Noah for a few hours, teaching them to read from an old tattered copy of Moby Dick she'd found on a shelf. She taught them math by having them count stones and sticks. She was trying to preserve a piece of the old world for them, a world where knowledge mattered more than just survival. Noah started talking again. Small words at first. Please, thank you. Then one day, he looked at Sarah after a reading lesson and said, "My mom read me stories too." It was a breakthrough and a heartbreak all at once. The biggest challenge was the psychic silence. We had run to the mountains to escape the luminal's mental reach, and it had worked. But now the silence was its own kind of prison. We were completely cut off. We had no idea what was happening in the world beyond our clearing. Was there a resistance? Were there others like us? Or were we truly alone? One day, about a month after the tithe, Ben and I decided we had to know. We couldn't live in ignorance forever. We needed supplies, medicine for Lily's cough, and most of all, information. We decided one of us would have to make a trip to the nearest town. "I'll go," I said. "You should stay with the kids." Ben nodded, his face grim. "Be careful, Mark. It's not the same world we left." 2 days later, I was driving my truck back down the winding dirt roads, my stomach in a tight knot. The journey felt different this time. I wasn't fleeing. I was infiltrating. The town, North Conway, looked deceptively normal from a distance. But as I got closer, I saw the changes. There were military checkpoints on the main roads, manned by tired-looking National Guardsmen. Their uniforms were clean, but their eyes were old. They waved me through without much interest. My beat-up truck and dirty clothes made me look like a local logger, not a fugitive. The town itself was quiet. Too quiet. There were people on the streets, but they moved with a kind of subdued weariness. They didn't make eye contact. The laughter of children was gone. The schoolyard was empty, its swings swaying gently in the breeze like tiny gallows. The windows of the elementary school were dark and empty. It had been a collection center. I parked in front of a general store and went inside. The man behind the counter, a gaunt man with a gray pallor, barely looked at me. I gathered what I needed: antibiotics, canned goods, batteries, salt. I tried to make small talk. "Quiet day," I said. The man just grunted. "Seems like the whole world's holding its breath." I tried again. He looked up at me then, his eyes full of a dull, simmering resentment. "Some of us got nothing left to hold our breath for," he said, his voice raspy. "Some of us did our duty, gave our best for the greater good." He spat the last 2 words like they were poison. His son or grandson had been one of them. The one who was chosen. I paid for my goods in cash and left, the man's bitterness clinging to me like smoke. I understood his anger. He had complied. He had made the ultimate sacrifice. And for what? A hollow, broken world. He hated the luminals, but I could tell he also hated people like me. The ones who hadn't complied. The ones who, in his mind, had gotten away with it. As I was loading the truck, I saw a poster tacked to a telephone pole. It was a government notice. It showed a simple, stylized drawing of a family, a man, a woman, and a child, with a golden star above their heads. The text read, "Be a Gold Star family. Report you next toward children." Comprehensive strength, a phone number was listed at the bottom. They had turned the citizens against each other. They had created a network of informants, preying on the grief and resentment of those who had lost their children. A gold star, once a symbol of military sacrifice, was now the mark of a collaborator. My blood ran cold. This world was more dangerous than I had imagined. It wasn't just about hiding from soldiers anymore. It was about hiding from everyone. Your neighbor, the man at the grocery store. Anyone could be an informant, hoping for some small reward, or simply acting out of spite. I was about to get in my truck and flee back to the safety of the mountains when I saw him. A man in a worn-out army jacket was furtively tearing down one of the posters. He looked around, his movements quick and nervous, then crumpled it up and shoved it in his pocket. He saw me watching him. His eyes narrowed, and for a second I thought he was going to run. But he held my gaze. There was something in his eyes I recognized. Not the dull resentment of the store owner. It was a spark, a fire. It was the same look I saw in Ben's eyes, the same look I felt in my own gut. He gave me a short, almost imperceptible nod. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into an alley. It wasn't much. It was barely anything, but it was a sign. I wasn't alone. Ben wasn't alone. We weren't the only ones who hadn't bowed. The resistance was real. It was small, it was hidden. It was tearing down posters in backwater towns. But it existed. I got in my truck, my heart beating with a new fierce hope. The trip had been a risk, but it had given me more than just medicine and batteries. It had given me a direction. We weren't just hiding anymore. We had to find them. We had to join them. The rats in the walls were about to learn how to bite. Returning to the cabin felt like coming home in a way the house in Boston never could again. Seeing Sarah's relieved face and Lily running to hug my legs solidified the purpose that had sparked in me back in town. They're turning people against each other, I told them that night, sitting around the fire with Ben. I described the gold star posters, the hollowed-out eyes of the people, the man in the alley. They've made hiding a crime. Not just against the state, but against your neighbor. Ben slammed his fist on the rough table. So we're not just fugitives, we're traitors. And our kids, what are they? Contraband. That's about the size of it, I said grimly. But that man, the one tearing down the poster, he's not the only one. There have to be others, pockets of them, hiding, fighting in small ways. So what do we do? Sarah asked, her voice tight with anxiety. We can't just sit here and wait for a grieving neighbor to stumble on us and make a phone call. She was right. Our sanctuary was no longer safe. It was only a matter of time. We needed to be proactive. We needed a way to fight back. But how? We had one rifle, a handful of tools, and two fathers who knew how to fix pipes and build walls. We were no match for the National Guard, let alone the psychic gods in the sky. The luminals, I started thinking out loud. Their greatest weapon isn't their ships, or whatever power they used on Miracle Mesa. It's the voice, the way they got in our heads. That's how they controlled everything without firing a shot. And we're safe from that up here, Ben added. The mountains, Tways, the trees. Something about this place blocks it. Exactly, I said, a thought beginning to form. What if that's their weakness? What if they're not all powerful? What if they have a blind spot? We spent the next few days experimenting. We took the small radio and tried to get a signal in different parts of the woods. In the open clearing, we could pick up the government broadcast loud and clear. But the deeper we went into the old growth forest, the thicker the canopy of ancient pines and oaks, the weaker the signal became. In a narrow, moss-covered gorge carved by a stream, The radio was pure static. "It's the density," Ben said, holding the silent radio. "Rock, water, old wood. It's like it absorbs the signal, scatters it." It was a primitive, low-tech solution to a high-tech problem. The luminals could talk to brains across the planet, but they couldn't get a clear signal through a few hundred feet of granite and hemlock. It was a weakness. A small one, but a real one. It meant places like our cabin, deep caves, old mines and dense forests were potential safe zones. They were islands of static in the luminal's ocean of control. This knowledge changed everything. We weren't just hiding in a random spot. We were occupying a piece of strategic psychic terrain. "This is how we find them," I said to Ben, pointing at our old paper atlas. "The other resistance cells, we can't use phones or radios, but we can use this. We look for the places like this, the national parks, the abandoned quarries, the remote, inaccessible places where people would go to ground." It was a long shot, a map full of maybes, but it was a plan. While Sarah continued the children's lessons and maintained our small camp, Ben and I started making careful, targeted trips. We became scavengers of the fallen world. We'd drive to the edge of a state park or a national forest, then go the rest of the way on foot looking for signs of life. For days we found nothing but empty trails and silent woods. Then, in the Green Mountain National Forest in Vermont, we found it. A symbol, carved into the bark of a birch tree, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. It was the same symbol from the Gold Star posters. The family with the star over its head, but it had been slashed through with a single defiant line. It was a message, a signpost for the underground. We followed the trail of marked trees for miles, deeper into the forest than I'd ever been. The path led us to an old abandoned marble quarry, a great white wound in the side of a mountain. At the entrance to the main quarry pit, we were met by two figures who seemed to melt out of the shadows. A man and a woman, both armed with hunting rifles, their faces hard and watchful. The man was the one I'd seen in town, the one in the army jacket. "You are a long way from home," he said, his voice low and steady. His rifle was pointed at my chest. "We saw the signs," I said, holding my hands up slowly. "We're looking for friends." The woman next to him, who had sharp, intelligent eyes, studied us. "What's the price of survival?" she asked. It was a test, a code. I thought for a moment, thinking of the president's speech. The tithe, the empty schoolyards, everything, I said. "And it's not worth it." The man lowered his rifle. "My name is Cutler," he said. "This is Maria. Welcome to the quarry." The resistance was real, and it was more than I could have hoped for. The quarry was home to nearly 50 people. Families with children, ex-soldiers, doctors, engineers, all of them fugitives. They had built a hidden community in the pit of the quarry, their tents and shacks shielded from aerial view by tarps and camouflage netting. They had a generator for power, a hydroponics garden for food, and a system of lookouts and patrols. It was a fledgling society, born of defiance. Cutler, a former Army Ranger, was their de facto leader. Maria, a disgraced astrophysicist who had tried to warn the government about the luminal's approach years ago, was their strategist. They listened to our story, about the cabin, about our discovery with the radio. Maria's eyes lit up. "The substrate," she said, tapping a finger on our map. "We theorized that certain geological and biological densities could create a kind of psychic interference, a static." "You've proven it." "These places are our fortresses." We learned that the luminal's control was not absolute. They relied on their human collaborators, the Gold Star network, and the remnants of the military to police the planet. The luminals themselves rarely intervened directly. They were like absentee landlords, content as long as the rent was paid. But what do they want the children for? Sarah asked. After Ben and I returned with the news and a plan to relocate our small family to the quarry. We don't know, I admitted. No one does. Maria thinks it's not for labor or food. She thinks it's something biological. That they're a dying or sterile race, and they're using human children as hosts or as genetic material to propagate themselves. The idea was so monstrous, so profoundly violating that it made the simple act of eating them seem merciful in comparison. They weren't just taking our children. They were stealing their very humanity, turning them into vessels for their own alien survival. That sealed it. Hiding wasn't enough. We couldn't just wait for them to come back for the next tithe. We had to fight. We had to hurt them. We had to show them that the human race was not a crop to be harvested. In the heart of that marble quarry, surrounded by a small band of outcasts, the real war began. And I, Mark, the construction worker, was about to learn a new trade: demolition. Joining the quarry resistance felt like waking up from a long, lonely dream. The isolation of the cabin had been a shield, but it had also been a cage. Here, surrounded by dozens of others who shared our fury and our desperation, there was a sense of purpose that was as vital as food or water. My skills, honed over 20 years of building things, suddenly had a new, terrifying application. I knew how structures worked. I knew their weak points. I knew how to bring them down. Cutler, the ex-ranger, saw this immediately. While he trained others in patrol tactics and small arms combat, he took me aside. "We can't fight their soldiers head on," he said, his voice a low rumble. We were looking at a satellite map Maria had managed to print. "We'd be massacred, but we can fight their infrastructure. We can break their new toys." Their new toys were popping up all over the region. The luminals, or their human puppets, were constructing a network of communication towers. They weren't for radio or television. Maria believed they were psychic amplifiers, designed to boost the luminals' mental signal, to penetrate the static of places like the quarry. They were a weapon aimed directly at our safe havens. "If they get that network online," Maria explained to the group, her face grim, "there will be nowhere left to hide. They'll be able to whisper in our heads even at the bottom of this pit." Our first target was a tower being built on a nearby mountaintop. It was a skeletal steel structure, guarded by a rotating patrol of a dozen National Guardsmen who had thrown their lot in with the new regime. They were what we called Alice, short for allies of the aliens. It was a cleaner word than traitor. My job was to plan the demolition. For a week, I studied blueprints Maria had acquired from a sympathetic contact in the state engineering office. I taught a small team of 3 others, a quiet mechanic named Dave, a wiry young woman named Kira who had been a rock climber, and Ben, the basics of structural sabotage. We didn't have high explosives. Our tools were cruder. We had acetylene torches salvaged from a factory, high tensile cable, and heavy-duty come-alongs. The plan was surgical. Kyria, with her climbing skills, would ascend the tower at its base on the cliffside, fixing the cables to the main support legs. Ben and I would handle the torches, weakening the steel at key stress points I had calculated. Dave's job was to be our lookout and to get our vehicle ready for a fast exit. The night of the operation was moonless and cold. The 5 of us moved through the dark woods like wraiths, our faces smeared with mud and charcoal. The fear was a living thing inside me, a cold, coiling snake in my gut. This wasn't hiding anymore. This was an attack. We were crossing a line. We crept to the edge of the construction site. The tower loomed over us, a black skeleton against the faintly glowing sky. The guards were lax, huddled around a fire, confident in their remote location. This was our advantage. They still thought of us as scattered, terrified rabbits, not organized predators. "Go," Cutler whispered into the cheap walkie-talkie we were using. Kira moved first, a shadow against the rock face, climbing with a silent grace that was breathtaking. She secured the cables. Ben and I moved in next, our torches hissing to life. The blue flame felt unnaturally bright in the darkness. We worked on opposite sides of the tower's base, cutting deep notches into the thick steel beams. The smell of hot metal filled the air. My hands were steady, but my heart was a trip hammer. I wasn't just cutting steel. I was attacking the government. I was committing treason. Every spark that flew from the torch was a tiny declaration of war. Lily's face flashed in my mind, her gappy smile, her innocent eyes. This was for her. I would become a monster to keep the real monsters away from her. "Cuts are made," I whispered into the radio, pulling back. We scrambled back into the trees as Cutler's team, on the other side of the ridge, began cranking the come-alongs. The steel cables went taut, groaning under the immense strain. For a moment, nothing happened. The tower just stood there, defiant. Then, with a sound like a giant's bones breaking, the weakened steel gave way. The tower twisted, contorted, and then fell. Not with a loud explosion, but with a prolonged grinding shriek of tortured metal. It crashed down the mountainside, a cascade of broken steel and shattered concrete. It was a beautiful, terrible sight. The guards were in chaos, shouting and firing their rifles blindly into the darkness. But we were already gone, melting back into the forest, running towards our extraction point. We made it back to the quarry just before dawn, exhausted, filthy, and electrified with a giddy, terrifying sense of victory. We had done it. We had fought back, and we had won. For the first time since the arrival, we had inflicted a wound. The celebration in the quarry was quiet but profound. We had proven to ourselves that we were not helpless. That night, I sat with Sarah on a ledge overlooking the hidden settlement. The lights from the tents and shacks below looked like a new constellation. "I never thought," she said, her voice soft, "that I'd be proud of you for blowing something up." I looked at my hands. They were scraped and burned, covered in grease and soot. They were the same hands I had used to build houses, the same hands I had used to hold my daughter. Now they were the hands of a saboteur. "I am not the same man I was, Sarah," I said quietly. "None of us are. I know," she said, taking my hand in hers. "But you are still a good man, Mark. You are doing this for the right reason." I wanted to believe her. But as I looked out at the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that the line between a good man doing a bad thing and just a bad man was getting thinner every day. Our victory was short-lived. 2 days later, Maria picked up a broadcast on her sophisticated radio rig. It wasn't the usual government propaganda. It was a military channel. Encrypted, but she had a knack for breaking codes. "It's a reprisal," she said, her face pale as she pulled off the headphones. "They know the attack came from this region. They're sending a team. Not guard this time. Regular army. Special forces. They're calling it Operation Clean Sweep. They were coming for us. Our little Vinteri had gotten their attention. The rabbits had bitten back, and now the wolf was coming to slaughter them in their warren." The feeling of triumph in the camp evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp fear. The game had changed. We weren't just fighting disillusioned guardsmen anymore. We were about to face real soldiers, Hunters who were trained to find and exterminate people like us. And worse, far worse, was the other piece of news Maria had intercepted. They weren't coming alone. The message said they would have L-Asset support. L-Asset. Luminal Asset. For the first time, one of the Overlords was coming down from the sky to join the hunt. The news that a Luminal was coming changed the very air in the quarry. Fear, which had been a constant but manageable companion, became a thick, suffocating fog. We had fought humans, we had destroyed a tower. But how do you fight a god? How do you shoot a creature that can boil your brain in your skull from 100 yards away? Panic began to set in. A few families wanted to run, to scatter back into the wilderness. It was Cutler who held us together. He gathered everyone in the center of the quarry pit, his voice cutting through the rising tide of fear. Running is what they want. He boomed, his ranger sergeant voice echoing off the marble walls. They want us broken and scattered. But we are not broken. We hurt them, and now they're trying to scare us. We knew this day would come. We will not run. We will prepare. This is our ground. We will make them bleed for every inch of it. His words were a bucket of cold water on the hysteria. He was right. The quarry was our best defense. Its geological properties gave us a measure of protection from the Luminal's psychic power. To abandon it was to walk naked into the storm. We had 2 days. We turned the quarry into a fortress, a death trap. Under my direction, we used the last of our scavenged materials to rig rockfalls and deadfalls along the narrow access paths. Maria identified the weakest points in our psychic shield, the areas where the rock was thinnest, and we avoided them. Cutler organized our small force of 50 able-bodied men and women into fire teams, assigning them to defensive positions dug into the quarry walls. The plan wasn't to win, it was to survive, to inflict as much damage as we could on the human soldiers, and to pray that we could somehow weather the storm of the Luminal itself. I sent Sarah and the children, along with the other non-combatants, to the deepest part of the quarry, an old mining shaft that went 100 feet straight down. It was damp and dark, but it was the most shielded place we had. Saying goodbye to Lily was the hardest thing I've ever done. She clung to me, her small face buried in my jacket. "You have to be a brave soldier, Daddy," she whispered, echoing words I had told her. "I will be," I promised, my throat tight. "You stay with Mommy. I'll come get you when it's over." As I walked away, back towards the killing ground we had prepared, I wasn't sure if that was a promise I could keep. The attack came at dusk. The soldiers, about 30 of them, were good. They moved silently, using the terrain trying to infiltrate from 3 directions at once. But this was our home. We knew every rock, every shadow. Cutler's warning system of tripwires and hidden observers gave us the crucial first move. The fight was brutal and chaotic. It was the crack of rifles echoing off stone, the flash of muzzles in the deepening gloom. We were outgunned and outtrained, but we had the advantage of defense and desperation. We fought like cornered animals. Ben was by my side, firing the hunting rifle with a calm, steady hand I wouldn't have thought possible from the gentle plumber I'd met. I wasn't a soldier. I didn't have a rifle. I had a detonator, wired to the charges we had set for the rockfalls. My job was to wait, to watch. The wait was its own form of torture. Then it appeared. It didn't walk into the quarry. It was just the find. There, standing on a high ledge overlooking the battlefield, as if it had stepped out of the air itself. It was tall, impossibly slender, wrapped in a shimmering, pearlescent material that seemed to drink the light. It had no discernible face, just a smooth, elegant ovoid where a head should be. It didn't move. It just stood there, observing the chaos, and then it raised a long three-fingered hand. The psychic attack was not like the voice from the first day. This was not a broadcast. This was a weapon. It was a high-frequency scream inside my skull that dropped me to my knees. It was the taste of burning wires in my mouth, the feeling of my teeth vibrating loose. Around me, our fighters cried out, clutching their heads. Their aim faltered, their coordination shattered. The soldiers below, apparently immune, pressed their advantage. Through the haze of pain, I saw Cutler. He was on one knee, blood trickling from his nose, but he was still fighting. He raised his rifle and fired a full clip at the shimmering figure on the ledge. The bullets seemed to hit a wall of invisible energy, a foot in front of the luminol, flaring like tiny fireworks before dropping harmlessly to the ground. The luminol tilted its head, an inquisitive, almost curious gesture. Then it focused its attention on Cutler. The ranger screamed, a raw, agonized sound that was cut short as his body convulsed and dropped, smoke rising from his head. He was gone. Just like that. The leader of our resistance, the rock we had all clung to, was gone. The sight of Cutler's death broke the spell of my own pain. A white-hot rage burned through the psychic scream. They would not win. I looked at the main group of soldiers, now advancing into the heart of the quarry, directly into the trap we had set. I looked at the luminol on the ledge, its attention now fixed on me, the man with the detonator. I could feel its mind pressing against mine, a cold, immense pressure. It knew what I was about to do. I looked at Ben. He was on the ground, shaking, but he saw the look in my eye. He knew what had to be done. The kids. Mark. He yelled over the din, "Get the kids. Go." He grabbed his rifle and started firing towards the advancing soldiers. Not to hit them, but to draw their fire, to buy me a few precious seconds. He was giving me my out. The luminol focused its power on him. Ben's rifle clattered to the ground. He looked at me, a last desperate plea in his eyes. A plea for his son. Then his body went rigid and he fell. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my thumb down on the detonator. The world erupted. The charges went off with a deafening roar, and tons of rock and marble broke loose from the quarry wall. A river of white stone cascaded down, a man-made avalanche that buried the advancing soldiers in an instant. The ground shook, and the ledge where the luminol stood crumbled. The creature, for all its power, was still subject to gravity. It didn't fall. It seemed to vanish in a shimmer of light just before the rock slide would have crushed it. It was gone, but so were its soldiers. The battle was over. The silence that fell was more profound than the noise. I was alive. I was alone. The resistance was shattered. I scrambled through the dust and ruin, my lungs burning, and made my way to the mine shaft. Sarah was there, her face a mask of terror. Lily and Noah were huddled behind her. "Ben?" she asked, her voice trembling. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head. The look on Noah's face when he understood will haunt me for the rest of my life. We had survived, but we had lost. We had lost our friends, our leaders, our sanctuary. We were back to where we started. A handful of fugitives in a world that wanted us dead. As I led my broken family out of the ruins of the quarry and back into the dark woods, I looked up at the sky. I knew the luminol was up there. It had seen my face. It knew who I was. This was personal now. It wasn't just about survival. It wasn't just a war for humanity. It was my war. The aftermath of the quarry was a long, silent walk through a cold, indifferent wilderness. We were ghosts again, But this time, we were haunted by the faces of the friends we'd lost. Noah was a shell, the light in his eyes extinguished. He held Lily's hand constantly, a silent, heartbreaking bond formed in the darkness of the mineshaft. Sarah was the steel that held us together, her grief buried deep beneath a layer of fierce maternal resolve. And I was Change, the man who left Boston. The father, desperate to hide his family, was gone. In his place was something harder, colder. The quarry had burned away my fear, leaving only a core of pure, unadulterated rage. The luminals had taken my world, and then they had taken my friends. They would not get a third strike. We found shelter in an old, abandoned ranger station, even more remote than my grandfather's cabin. For weeks we just existed, healing our wounds, both physical and psychological. I spent my days teaching Noah how to track, how to read the forest. It was what Ben would have wanted. I was trying to honor my friend's last wish, to protect his son, but I knew it was a hollow gesture. The only true way to honor the dead was to keep fighting. The world outside our tiny pocket of existence had moved on. The clean sweep operations were declared a success. The government announced that the isolated pockets of anti-compliance sentiment had been pacified. The resistance, they claimed, was dead. They were wrong. One evening, as I was tinkering with Maria's salvaged radio rig, trying to squeeze some life out of it, I found something. It wasn't a voice. It was a signal, a simple repeating pulse of code. It was the same slash through the star symbol we had seen carved on the trees, translated into Morse code. It was a digital whisper in the dark, a call to arms. The resistance wasn't dead. It had been broken, scattered, but it was regrouping. The signal contained coordinates, a location deep in the Allegheny Mountains of Pennsylvania, an old, decommissioned Cold War bunker. A place built to survive the end of the world. It was a risk. It could be a trap, but it was the only hope we had. "We have to go," I told Sarah, showing her the coordinates on the map. She looked at the children asleep by the fire, their faces peaceful in the flickering light. "Is there any other choice?" she asked, her voice weary. There wasn't. To stay was to die, slowly, either from starvation or discovery. To go was to choose to live, or at least to die trying. The journey south was a long and perilous one. We traveled by night, on foot and in a stolen car that I hot-wired, a skill I never thought I'd need. We saw the new world up close. The Gold Star checkpoints were everywhere. The faces of the alleys were hard and suspicious. The faces of the compliant civilians were empty, beaten down. But we also saw the signs. The slashed star scratched onto a gas station bathroom wall. A whispered word of encouragement from an old woman who gave us a loaf of bread and told us to keep the fire burning. We were not as alone as we thought. The bunker was hidden beneath a dilapidated farmhouse, its entrance concealed under a hayloft. It was run by a woman named General Aris Thorne, a retired Air Force officer who had been cashiered for being a vocal opponent of the surrender. She was in her 60s, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen everything. The bunker was a hive of activity. It was filled with the survivors of a dozen shattered resistance cells like ours. Engineers, soldiers, scientists, doctors. Maria was there. She had escaped the quarry through a different route. The reunion was a small, bright spark in the darkness. They had a plan. A crazy, impossible, beautiful plan. "We can't beat them on the ground," General Thorne explained, her voice crisp and clear, in a briefing room deep beneath the earth. "They have the numbers and the psychic advantage, so we're going to change the battlefield." Maria stepped forward and pointed to a diagram on a screen. "The luminals are not gods," she said, her voice filled with a fierce passion. "They are a biological species, and they have a biology we can attack. We've analyzed the atmospheric residue from their arrival, the particles from the quarry. They have a unique protein structure, one that is highly susceptible to a specific engineered virus. A bioweapon, a plague designed for a single species." "But how do we deliver it?" I asked. "Their ships are in high orbit, we can't reach them." "We don't have to," Thorne said, a grim smile on her face. "They have a processing hub, a place where they are taking the children from all over the North American continent before they are taken off-world. A central collection point." She brought up a satellite image. It was a massive, newly constructed facility in the remote plains of Kansas. "A place of unimaginable horror. They are bringing our children there," Thorne continued, her voice like flint. "And once a month, a luminal transport ship descends to pick them up. That ship is our target." The plan was audacious. A small team would infiltrate the facility, not to rescue the children. An impossible task, but to get the virus canister onto that transport ship. Once the virus was inside their closed atmospheric system, it would spread through their fleet like wildfire. It was a suicide mission, but it was a chance to turn their greatest crime against them. A chance to use the children they had stolen as the delivery system for their own destruction. There was no question of who would lead the infiltration. I was a demolition expert. I knew how to get inside places that were designed to keep people out. And I had a personal score to settle. I had seen their faces. I had felt their power. This was my war. The final chapter. A few nights before I was set to leave, I was sitting with Lily, trying to explain where I was going without telling her the truth. "Daddy has to go on a long trip," I said, my voice thick, "to fix something that's very broken." "Are you going to fight the monsters?" she asked, her blue eyes looking straight into mine. She knew more than we gave her credit for. "Yes," I said, "I am." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her most prized possession, the small, worn-out stuffed bear, Mr. Snuggles. "You should take him," she said, her voice serious. "He'll keep you safe." I took the bear, its button eyes staring up at me. In that moment, I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a saboteur. I was just a father, holding a piece of his daughter's heart. "I'll bring him back," I promised. The next morning, I stood at the entrance of the bunker ready to leave. Sarah held me tight. "You come back, Mark," she whispered fiercely. "You hear me? You come back." I looked over her shoulder at my daughter and at the solemn-faced boy who was now like a son to me. I was fighting for more than just humanity. I was fighting for them. I was fighting for a future where a little girl didn't have to give her teddy bear to her father as a talisman for war. As I walked out into the world, the little stuffed bear tucked safely inside my jacket, I knew the odds were against me. I was one man against an empire, but they had made a fatal mistake. They had demanded our children thinking it would break us. They thought fear would make us compliant. But they didn't understand. You don't take a child from a human being. You don't threaten the one thing they will die for, the one thing they will kill for. They didn't ask for a tithe. They asked for a war, and now they were going to get it.